Okay, back on the Firebird today. I'm gonna roll this out of here, get it next in the other bay so I can start doing some body work. But got some questions from a subscriber, Jeff Bouget. Yeah, at least where I come from is Bouget. Might be Bougie, I don't know. Jeff. Anyway, he's doing a 67 Firebird convertible as well. And his comment is kind of true. You can find a lot of content on how to fit the quarters up and everything for the hard tops, but the convertibles, it's kind of a different deal. And it's a lot different bracing back through here and how it all mounts and aligns. So he had some very good questions, and I don't think I ever put this all into one little segment on how to get this all to line up right here in this section particularly. So I'm just going to run through his questions and kind of take you through the method I use to line all that up and get it right to begin with. One of the things he threw out there was a measurement from the top of the door. Let me show you where I'm picking that up with this weird little tire tape right here, all the way back through. And right to the point, I'm at like 69. I'm going to call that 69 and 5/16. But that measurement is not as critical as you might think, and I'm going to take you through why. These bodies are designed to have quite a tolerance. There is opportunity to, make up for deficiencies in strangeness in each panel. But so the first thing I noticed when I look at his photographs, like here's the first one, and when I look at it, I can tell right away there's something going on between the tail panel and the quarter. Now, I don't know how much he's had this clamped in, or if this picture was kind of in a weird state. But again, I'm just going to take you through the process I use and the steps I use to line this all up. A lot of this was derived from Juby Mays, obviously. He's the man when it comes to this stuff, but he hasn't done a full video on quarters for a convertible. So some of this I had to learn. Now, this might be a little hard to see. No, actually it's pretty good. These convertibles have this additional brace back here, and the 67s only, to my understanding, have this vertical brace that the cocktail shaker mounts to. We'll get to that. But the first thing I would do in this case is take the quarters off and prep the quarters and the tail panel. And what I mean by that is there is a return that goes in this way from both the tail panel and the quarter here, all right, all the way down through here. And you clamp it. I'm not sure we're going to be able to see it again, but it's back in there. You can kind of see where the tape comes up. It's right here. You want to over break that so it's spread out. Let me see if I can show you. So it's spread out like this. So when you push those two panels together, the first thing it's going to touch is this point right here, the seam. The rest of it's going to be spread out a little bit so that when you clamp it put the clamps in there, it'll pull in, and this won't be a challenge for you. If you leave it underbroke like this and you clamp out here where my fingertips are, well, the saddle in here is never going to tighten up. So if you overbreak that just before you put it on, do that, it'll make your life so much easier. The other thing is there is a return right on the back side of this joint right here that you have to grind down to almost nothing. It's like less than an eighth of an inch. Otherwise, it won't sit flat right here. So there's a return in here you got to grind. You got to overbreak these guys so that when you push them together, this joint comes together first, okay? Now, in looking at his photo right here, you can see the tail panel's not back far enough. The tail panel in here is supposed to be pretty close to flush. Or it's, kind of eyeball it, get it as nice as you can. But this surface is supposed to kind of transition right into that one. So you don't get a big lip in here, okay? It can be a little, but not much, all right? And you can see the die's a little fat right there. But all this is going to get filled with seam sealer anyway. But you want that as tight and as neat as possible. But what point I'm getting at is this panel needs to be back in here. And that's really what's going to drive the rest of this, is how far back the top of this tail panel is supposed to go. Having said that, now, with the quarter still off, I had to remove this brace. I had to take it off. Otherwise, I just could not get my quarters to really relax and fit the way I wanted them to. And it's actually quite easy to put them back in with the quarters on. So I took this out, I left them together, but I took them out as one piece. One key point when you put them back in, make sure that when you put them back in, you have the cocktail shakers mounted in here, picking up all the points through the floor into this. That way when you weld it back on down at the bottom, it's lined up, okay? But again, I had to take just this brace. It runs from here to the tail and the vertical. I took them off just because that's the only way I could get it to kind of freely move where I needed it to be. If you leave those in, they're going to fight you the whole way. So just take them out. They're like 6 spot welds. No big deal. The other thing that you really want to make sure of is in here in the trunk floor drop. Now I know you're not going to see. Well, I guess you can. The trunk floor drop in here is not supposed to touch the quarter panel. If you have that touching the quarter panel, it's off, okay? Now, the trunk floor drops that you buy are made for 67 or 68. They are not shaped properly for the 67. You have to split them, tweak them a little bit to get it to follow the floor pan, but then it leaves a bulge in the side that would almost touch the quarter panel, or did touch the quarter panel. So you just got to kind of reshape that to match the quarter panel. Remember, there's supposed to be a little gap through there, not crazy big, but certainly not enough. You don't want it close enough so that it could rub, wear paint off, and rust, right? So the trunk floor drop-offs, you got to make sure those don't touch the quarter, because if those start restricting you, you're going to fight everything, okay? So now once those pieces are out, you have the trunk floor drop-off prepped and ready. Your tail panel's still in, I'm assuming. You can pop your quarters back on. Just set them up on there. I screwed in, when I did that, I kept screwing in my B-pillar here. Let's see if I can get this open. So I would, when I would do that, I would screw down through my B-pillar, down through here with the sheet metal screws before I plug welded it. Got all that sorted out. Got my rear here of the quarter lining up perfectly with the rear of the rocker, okay? That's your reference point forward and back. Important. Because at that point, you come back here, this is the reference point back here, is this seam. And there's nothing you're going to do to move that in and out substantially. So, okay, put the quarter back on. Now, the next thing you want to do, if you look at his photo here, Jeff, your photo shows a pretty big gap down the side all the way up. Now that's a little too much, but what it shows me is up here at the top, that quarter could be pulled in more. And to do that, you just use the strap method. Now, I like these straps, and the reason I say that, there's a very good reason to what I call delta hooks. These hooks you can put on the body to slip it through the hole. You know, they cost you $5 at Harbor Freight, and now you're pulling directly against the panel. You're not torquing the hole. I don't have it in all the way, but usually I'll grind the rubber off this and slide so it slides in the hole nice. Then you're pulling directly on the face up. I noticed on Jeff's print he has an eye bolt in here, and he's hooked into the end of the eye bolt, which is fine. It's just when you're pulling that eye bolt down, you're actually putting some twist in this bumper bracket hole, and it could give you something funny using a traditional S hook. But what I like to do with these, again, this was a Juby method. Then you take your strap, put it up over the top like this, and put a clamp right here so it can't pull back down. Just, any type of clamp. Then come over to the other side, pick up the frame rail, bumper mount back here or something, and just kind of ratchet that in. Pull it over until that seam seals up. Just kind of closes up. The trick is you want to get that as close to 3/16 all the way as you can so that you have the least amount of screwing around with it, cutting, slitting, doing all that. Okay, that's a given. So, okay, one step before that, however, the first thing you want to do is get this seam lined up better. So pull it in a little bit with your strap, get it clamped, put it in here, and then put your vice grips in the back here and clamp those seams to that seam right together so it's lined up. The tail panel can't move in and out. The quarter panel can't move in and out. Everything is kind of hung there by this point, right through here. Then start pulling on the top to try to get it to come over and give you the better alignment down this joint, okay? Let me pull this out of here. Then, once you have that pulled over to where you kind of like it, drop your screws back in at the point up here where it meets the filler panel and repeat on the other side. But again, the first thing I would do is clamp these points on both sides just to make sure that stays. All right. You can also throw the strap underneath, come across here, and you can see these pull in like beautifully. If this is done right, this is a no-brainer. So you pull that in, and you can drop a clamp and a screw on the bottom to keep that seam accurate too. So the first thing you do is kind of tighten this up. Get the whole thing pulled right in. Excuse me. Okay, so I've got my tail panel connected to my quarters. Everybody's happy. I get my trunk in there, put the deck on, kind of center it up, figure out where I got to pull in, and just pull the sides in at the top over on this end to get it so that I have a nice 3/16 gap most of the way. Okay, now you're going to see right away this is all screwed up. This doesn't match the tail panel or whatever. Now, they do not weld this seam for a reason. This is all left floating, and there's actually extra material out here that's all kind of in there. You end up having to, trim that off, massage that. But on almost every one of these I've seen, you've had to cut right through here to clock this down a little bit to pick up this shape right here that resides under it in this piece. So after I get this piece in and I got my top somewhere where I want it with a couple of straps and I know my trunk's going to be okay-ish, I will slit this, clock this how I need it to be, clamp it with some the bullnose body clamps right through here, hold it right in place, and then drop a couple screws once I know I've got it close. All right, repeat on the other side. So again, this is not going to fit right because even when this is lined up where it's supposed to be, this is odd. And you can understand it. This die is quite complicated. There's so many moving parts. I mean, different pieces and angles that have to come together. It's not hard to understand. But all you have to do, one little slit in here, clock it under, clamp it, weld it. Re-weld this slit, okay? Now, I actually did that first. Some would argue that you don't really want to weld that back up until after you get this gap right. But I just welded it up because knowing that if I had to release it, it's only a quick grinder slot away, right? So, after I got that clamped on, screwed down, so I was happy with it on both sides, then I went to looking at the trunk. Now the trunk is a little different. The trunk, you want this edge, when you project down, you can see that it kind of picks up that corner of the tail panel, right? So that's what I was kind of going for. When I did that, I noticed my gap at the top was quite large. So it was over a quarter. It certainly wasn't the 3/16 I was looking for. And it was really large in these corners here in the bell. So it kind of went way out like that. So I did a whole segment on that where I took some TIG rod, welded a new edge on the filler panel, not the trunk. I could have gone either way, but I did it on the filler panel. And then it made like a little ledge that came out. And then I used all metal under that to fill it. And that worked okay. But the key being then, my gaps down the sides, I got them as close as possible, obviously. But this end is almost never going to be right. It's either going to be too close or too far. And all you have to do is slit it through here, manipulate that, weld it back up. And it is what it is. It's what you have to do. Again, same thing over here. Now these edges are fairly straight. If you look at on a line, I haven't put a flat edge on it, but it's pretty straight. So, you kind of work both sides of the trunk till it's the same. You may have to take a little material off the trunk if the body's straight and the trunk's wavy, or vice versa, but that's all you really have to do. But the key takeaway is this distance isn't nearly as important as everything else lining up properly, so you don't have weird joints here. Again, I brought my trunk back to the point where it met up with the tail panel, and it gave me a big gap. Some guys will be like, oh no, just move the trunk forward and slit here and pull this in. Pull this edge in. And you could do that too. My concern was that if I did that and pulled this ahead an eighth, I was going to have a situation where my trunk the back edge didn't really line up with the tail panel. Is that the way it was from the factory? Who knows? But that's just one of the things I ran into. But either way, that's kind of and I've done a number of segments on how this all came together, but I never did one that kind of talked about all of it as a whole and what the plan is. And I learned a lot going along the way, but it was pretty key information. After I had the quarters back in, screwed down on the top, everything happy, then I put those braces back in. Again, mount the cocktail shaker to the floor and to this brace so it's right where it needs to be, and then weld through the body, plug weld down into that brace. And then the plug welds up here, put those back in as well. All pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. But, it is one of those things that can be a little intimidating when you're first looking at it, like, oh man, none of this shit lines up back here. But when you really start to bear down on it, you're like, okay, one step at a time. I know this surface has to line up, these 2 points. End of story. This is constrained by the front, and which is constrained by the rocker. So end of story. That has to be where it is. So this has to come back. This has to clamp to it. This has to match. That's your next step. Slit this, clock it so it matches. End of story. Just weld it back up. Then center up the trunk the best you can. Once the tops are pulled in to where you believe you have the most area of 3/16 gap, then screw it in at the top. End of story. Then once you get the trunk fitting against the tail panel, against this point here, then you have to work either the front edge of the trunk. Certainly got to work this corner. I haven't seen one yet that lined up properly through there. But once you just nail down your constraining points first, the points that aren't going to be able to be moved easily. Like, I would hate to have to try to move all this, right? I mean, that would be a nightmare. So, again, that's just how I did it. I'm not a professional. I watched a lot of different people do this, and that was the method I came up with. When you start to think about how Fisher designed these bodies in the first place, they are very, very, very forgiving. There are so many places that you can put in a little extra, tweak it here, tweak it there, and it won't be noticeable. But gaps are one thing that's very noticeable. So, you know, once you work that back edge in so that those places, so that this edge is as close to this as you can get it, then start working backwards. So this edge clamped in, this edge slit, clocked, clamped, screwed, pulling the top in. I probably would, before I welded this back up, I'd make sure I pulled my top over to where it wanted to be. Pull that over using the delta hooks. Delta hooks are going to give you the most even pull and closest force to the panel. So in other words, it's not providing leverage out here that's trying to twist the face of the panel. That's kind of the way I roll with it. It obviously worked. Is there another way? Probably. But, you know, like I said, I've watched many hours of this stuff, mostly on the hard tops. Very few people have gone through this detail on convertibles. So hopefully this helps you, Jeff, and answers your questions for you. Yeah, if there is also the idea being that before you weld all this up, there is an opportunity to shim up the back of the frames of the rear spring shackles a little bit and move that whole rear floor section up just a hair to get your door gaps to close up. But that's a topic for a different time. Your door gaps, once you kind of get the rear all welded in and everything in place, your door gaps are kind of what they're going to be. Jeff also mentioned that he had some problems with an A-pillar mounting points that were wrong. A-pillar mounting points were too low. One thing I noticed on mine is I have the stock A-pillars. One of the few things that was remaining from the original car. But what I also found was my aftermarket doors, the holes and the plates didn't line up that great. So if you're having to slot or move your A-pillar holes a great deal, before you do that, move your bolt plate around in the door itself and make sure that in the travel of that plate you can actually engage a screw all the way through that travel. That will probably help you more than you think. It's an important little thing that, you know, with the aftermarket doors, the holes that mount these hinges weren't great, and they didn't do a super nice job of lining up those holes with the plate in behind it that restrains the nut plate. So, just another little tidbit that you can put together and make it right. So anyway, sorry this seems to have dragged on a little bit, but this is just again a little lessons learned on the convertible quarter panels, and how to line them up as good as possible. You know, the other thing I also had to do, just for the record here, now that I think about it, is I had to remove this brace. This is it looks like a little I-beam that runs from here all the way over. I removed that when I was doing my body alignment and then put it back in right at the end after I had my quarters and everything lined up, because this can constrain you terribly too in pulling the tops of the quarters in. So I did bust that loose, and once that was loosened up, my life got a lot easier trying to move all that around and get it to line up better. So, you know, again, just because that brace is where it's at from the factory doesn't mean that that's going to be great for your panels, right? So your panels are aftermarket. That brace, you know, they're different. So just if you release that brace, get it lined up with your body panels, because that's what everybody's going to see, then put the braces back in. That's the way to think about this. So anyway, feel like I'm rambling. I will, if you got any other questions or anybody else has one like this, please reach out. Happy to help. I'm sorry it took so long, Jeff, but I've been working on another project the last couple weeks, so that's out of the way now. So I'm back on this. So anyway, hope that helps, and we'll catch you later.